rhyme beyond reason, until at last he saw, afar off, there seemed to be a glowing, and it was not quite daylight, but it was not firelight either. He went down further, until at last he came to a little cave. He went through the cave and looked out on a mighty chasm, wrought as it were out of a single diamond it was, for it shone bright with emerald grass, sapphire sky, and across the way, a mile or more, there was a great palace, carven as it were from a single ruby. And crossing the field he saw Hild, walking tower, proud and tall, and he followed her. He followed her to the mighty palace, and it was empty, and he wondered at it. But just as he came in, he heard a shout coming from the very centre of the palace itself, and he followed the shout until at last he came to a hall, big beyond the reckoning of man it was, and he stayed at the centre, for he saw, even as he watched, Hild was going through a mighty throng of people, and they cheered her. And as he watched, she climbed up to the dais at the end of the great hall, and there, at the end of the dais, was arranged the elven king himself, and as Hild went up, she changed. Her housemaid's raiment was lost, and suddenly there she was, a mighty queen, in a raiment of silver, and on her brow there was a silver crown, and the king with his golden crown greeted her, and 3 beautiful children came and ran at her, and she laughed to see them and whisked them round and round, and then she took out of her cloak the 3 brass rings that she had been given as payment, and blew on them. And the first turned to silver, the second turned to gold, and the third platinum, shining bright. And the children laughed with joy and played with them. And as the children laughed, the wild feast started. Great foods were brought out, and magic tricks. Fire was pulled out from ears, and wild balloons let off. And the feast waxed fast and furious, and everyone was happy. Everyone was joyous these Yule night. Well, everyone? No, not quite everyone. Sitting there by the left hand of the king was a little old woman, who alone in Elvenland seemed to have aged, and on her brow was a blue crown wrought as a living sapphire, and she looked sour, and occasionally she would look at fierce envy at Hild as she played with her children, and anger, covetous, at the king standing by. In the end, how long the feast lasted, the young man could never say. Sometimes it seemed to him that it was over in an instant, sometimes that it must have lasted a millennia. But sooner or later, it became obvious to everyone. It had to stop. And then the king stood up, and he turned to the little figure on the left and said, "Mother, Mother, hasn't Hild suffered enough? See how her children hold to her." And it was true at that moment. The 3 children held with all their might and main, and they all dropped their rings. And one ring, the platinum ring, bounced down the hall. And the young man, seeing it right near him, picked it up and put it in his pocket. And then the old woman spoke for the very first time and said, Hild knows that an aeon of aeons, nay, 7 aeons of 7 aeons would not be enough to assuage her guilt. A commoner to marry an elven king? Nay, she knows she will never be free till the 3 conditions are met. But rest assured, the man is not yet born, or ever shall be, to set her free. And her son said, I wish the man was even now at her door. I wish he was listening to your envious talk. And Hild said, so be it, I go. And she climbed off the dais. And as she climbed off the dais, she turned back into her old garb and sadly went through the hall, not looking back. Now the young man knew he had to run. He ran as fast as he possibly could, out of the palace, across the emerald fields, up the stairs, out through the cave, to where the bridle was hung up. Just in time he was, for Hild came back and sadly put the bridle on his mouth once again leapt upon his back, and once again said, Ride, ride now as if the wild hunt was after you. Ride as if Odin pursued you. Ride although your heart will break and your soul will burn. Ride to the Southlands as if Surt pursued you. And suddenly he leapt up into the sky and rode across wild Iceland, across the mountains, across the glaciers, back to the bovey where he had left. And as she rode, Hild was sobbing dryly, and she landed and led him back into the bovey, took the bridle off, and 2 tears she shed. One, she said, for my children lost, and one for your life that is burnt out. And then she was gone. Well, the next morning, the party waxed fast and furious, and many men wondered what was the fate up in the lonely bovey. What was the fate, then, of the shepherd? and some went to find him. And they led him back into the hall at last, as the feast was laid out, alive. And Hild looked shocked, and the farmer said, "Why, you're alive. Have you any story to tell?" And the young man said, "Yes, I have a story to tell." And he told the tale. He told how he had gone down to Elfenland and what he had seen. He told of the bridal and of Hild. And the farmer turned to Hild and said, "Well, Hild, what do you have to say for yourself?" And Hild said, "It is all made up. It is all a lie." And the young man said, "Nay, it is no lie. Look." And he held up the ring, the platinum ring, the ring from Elvenland. And he said, "Hild, you dropped this. Do you deny it? Look, there's an inscription on the name, from your mother Hild to her eldest princeling." And Hild bowed her head and admitted it all. And then the farmer said, "Right, although it's Christmas night, we will kill you now to revenge for all the men that you have slain." And then the young man himself stood up and said, "No! No, it is not Hild's fault. It is not Hild's fault. She was forced to it. She was enchanted. Let her go free, as the grass grows. Let her go free." And the farmer looked at Hild in fury. But suddenly she was laughing. Her laughter was like a summer's breeze on a winter's afternoon, a laughter that filled the hall, an laughter that seemed to echo with the sound of an elven court, coming and laughing. And she laughed and said, "I am free! The 3 conditions met. For I was told by my mother-in-law, no man could follow me to Elvenland. No man could take something from Elvenland, and no man would plead my case. And you have done all 3, and now I return to my kingdom." And she was swept up by the summer's breeze, by the laughter, and was gone. And in her place there was just flowers the colours of jewels, and leaves the colours of gold. And they never saw her again. But men said in after times she looked after that young man, for he prospered in everything he did. He married well, inherited much wealth, had many children, and all of them had golden hair, and he was always blessed with luck. And it is also said that good luck follows his family from that day to this in the high vales of Iceland. Thank you. That is a traditional story from Iceland. We are Widsith and Dior Presents, being very social, sharing a mic. Here's my colleague Widsith.
Oh, that was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. It was, as I said, a traditional tale, and what we're going to do today, what we're going to think about, or just talk about, is the bit I love about Christmas. I love the fact that it combines pagan and Christian festivals, and probably always has done, isn't it, Widsith?
Well, yes. I mean, yes. Although there was no Christmas, as far as the very early Christians were concerned, there always have been sort of pagan and old religion festivals.
And isn't it the case something about Christmas and the fact that it makes no sense in terms of the Christmas story, because there's no way shepherds would be up in bovies on Christmas night?
No, absolutely.
So where does the 25th come from?
Well, I think that's, yes, the birthday of the unconquered sun.
So Mithraism, is that
yes,
Mithraism?
Mithraism.
Okay, so that's the 25th. And wasn't there other things like the Saturnalia around this time of year?
Yes, yes. I think that began on the 17th.
And the
December.
Carlids.
Yes, well, there were lots of New Year celebrations, and that goes back to Babylon and Egypt, and there's been midwinter and New Year holidays of the Roman Empire.
And didn't it all start a bit earlier as well? All this commercialising of Christmas, and Christmas starts too early. Christmas actually used to start on November the 17th, I think.
Yes, late November.
Late November,
yes,
but in proper good pagan times. And then you had the Saturnalia. Now, is that the festival where everybody swaps roles?
I think it's probably related to that. I mean, there's definitely sort of Lords of Misrule theme going on. Yes, of sort of equality and sort of...
Carlads would have been New Year, so that would have been Janus.
Yes, the god that...
And so how does then Christmas get Christianised?
That look both ways.
Because you said it wasn't around originally, because it's not in the Bible, it's not an old Christian festival. What happens?
Well, I think there's some evidence sort of with Augustine and things like that they sort of thought, oh well, people seem to be sort of burning lots of things and lighting lots of lights and sacrificing oxen and stuff like that, so we'd rather they did that rather than in pagan shrines, and to keep off demons we'd much rather they put them on churches and for the Lord's blessing and things like that.
So they just simply took over the Christian rituals?
Well, pretty much, yes. I mean, what's interesting is that I think the first mention of Christmas is in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. I think I'm right in saying 1043.
1043. But actually, Aelfred used to celebrate Twelfth Night. I know this because there's a story that he was celebrating it one time in, I forgot this on the way here, Cheltenham. He was in Cheltenham, and the Vikings knew that he was celebrating Twelfth Night in Cheltenham, and so they did a surprise raid on Cheltenham, partly